Taxi!
Where to, mate?
Hello, mate. 55 Tufton Street, please.
55 Tufton Street, SW1. Yep, I know it well. Hop in, sir. This is A Nation of Taxpayers, a weekly podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance.
On this episode, we're going to be talking about freedom, we're going to be talking about smoking, we're going to be talking about the nanny state and those people who tell us how to live our lives. I'm your host, Duncan Barkes. Alongside me this week from the TPA, Benjamin Elks, the Grassroots Development Manager. Good to see you.
Hello, Duncan. Good to be with you.
And we welcome Simon Clark, Director of Smokers Lobby Group Forest. Simon, welcome.
Hello.
Gentlemen, a lot of stuff to chew over here. Now, I've been aware of Forest as a lobbying organisation for many, many years. You and I have spoken in the past on various radio stations over the last couple of decades. But for people listening to this particular episode, the background to Forest, Simon, because it started in 1979?
That's right. It was set up by a former Battle of Britain fighter pilot called Sir Christopher Foxley Norris.
Yeah.
Now, he was already in his 80s at the time. He was a lifelong pipe smoker. Yeah. And legend has it that he was standing on the platform at Reading railway station when old Biddy marched up to him and told him to put his pipe out. And he thought, hang on a sec, I fought a war for you. Yeah. And so he set up a smokers' rights group. Yeah. He wasn't involved for that long, but very quickly Forest was professionalised. A professional director was brought in. There have been 4 directors in the 46 years that we've existed. And obviously it's just been one battle after another. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and claim that Forest has been the most successful pressure group in history, but we've continued to fight our corner, and I think it's an important corner to fight.
I don't think anyone will disagree with that. I mean, Ben, you have an interest in this whole area, don't you, of what we might call nanny statism?
Yes, absolutely. I think there is this great overreach of from government and from interested lobby groups to police the things that people enjoy, whether that's having a cigarette after work or going to the pub and having a pint, or whether it's enjoying too much meat or salt in your diet or sugar. All these things that sort of make life that little bit easier to enjoy.
Absolutely.
Are sort of the enemy of certain people.
Some might say the enemy of pleasure. Forest, Freedom Organisation for the Right to Enjoy Smoking Tobacco. I've got that right, haven't I? Why is there a battle? Why is because it seems to me over the last few decades, and we'll talk about what I call the big bit of legislation in 2007, what I call the ultimate smoking ban. But why has it become such a battle?
Well, I mean, you could go back some decades to when politicians didn't feel they had to get involved in people's lifestyles in the way that they do today. Having said that, I suppose there's always been minority groups who have been targeted. And at the moment, smokers clearly are a relatively small minority, 12-13% of the adult population, compared to 50 years ago when smokers were about 50% of the population, so it was far harder to attack them. Now, their minority status is almost used as an excuse with which to attack them. Now, you'd never say that about any other minority group. No. So I think things have changed a lot over the last few decades. And of course, smokers themselves are not that great in fighting back. Because I think what's happened again over the last 20, 30 years is that many smokers have been attacked both sort of professionally and in terms of their private life. And to a certain extent, they've put the white flag up. They thought we can't combat that. And the other problem we've had is actually getting non-smokers on board to fight these battles, because non-smokers think, well, this is not my battle, it doesn't affect me. And of course our argument is, yes, of course it does affect you. Might not affect you today, but it'll affect you further down the line. And one other issue, just going back to what you were mentioning a minute ago, pleasure. We're always told you've got to quit smoking because it's terrible for your health. Now, nobody's disputing the fact that there are serious health risks associated with smoking. But what people are not allowed to say anymore, and we're perhaps the last group that will come out and say it, actually a great many people enjoy smoking. That's why they do it. They know the health risks, but they're prepared to put the health risks to one side. until perhaps they have a serious sort of health issue, and then they think, goodness me, I better quit or stop. And that clearly happens. People give up smoking for all sorts of reasons, but pleasure is one of the reasons they do it. And another reason a lot of smokers smoke is for comfort. Yeah. And one of the issues, for example, with this whole business of levelling up communities, the anti-smoking lobby leapt on that and said, right, one way we can sort of level up communities is to get people who live in those communities to stop smoking and improve their health. And we said, well, hang on a sec. There's a reason why a lot of people smoke, and often it's because of environmental conditions. They don't live in very pleasant environments. Spend your money not on anti-smoking campaigns, forcing people to give up something they enjoy, but spend the money on improving people's environment, and then you might find that they will actually give up. But of course, famously, the last point I'll make, famously back in 2004 or 5, before the smoking ban came in, the Labour Health Secretary of the time was John Reid. Now, John Reid was a smoker. He had been a very heavy drinker, but he represented one of the poorest constituencies, not just in Scotland, but the whole of the UK. And he famously said, if you're a young single mother living on a sink estate, then maybe having a cigarette is one of the few daily pleasures in your life. And of course, the anti-smoking lobby came on him like a ton of bricks. But he was speaking the truth.
I once did a radio phone-in, I forget which station it was on, and it was about, there was some issue in the news at the time about, I think it was smoking rooms in hospitals, I think it might have been. And obviously there's no great secret to this, but sometimes you take an opposing view, or you take a view that you know is going to generate a lot of phone calls to your radio station. And I was saying, well, look, we should have these things, right? You know, if you're in hospital for 6 months for whatever reason, if you want to go and shuffle out and have a ciggy, then that's going to give you some kind of comfort. And I took this call from this person who talked about having to visit I think it was their elderly father in hospital, and it was such a distressing situation to go and see this old gentleman day after day, and the only way she could deal with it afterwards was to have a smoke in the hospital grounds, for example. And it just made me think that sometimes the demonisation has almost gone too far. It's just like smoking bad, and no one apart from Forrest are making the point that actually for some people it is an opportunity to maybe de-stress or to have a bit of comfort or whatever. Ben, you're a smoker. I'm a kind of cigar man these days. I stopped the cigarettes a long time ago, but I love a little cigar every now and then. Do you feel as a smoker demonised?
There's definitely an element of that. You get sort of funny looks from people often, even if it's something as simple as standing outside of a pub having a smoke, you know, with your pint in hand. But I just wanted to quickly pick up on something Simon said there about the difficulty of getting non-smokers on board. And I think you're absolutely right. There's this thing of, oh, well, it doesn't affect me, but it will, because it might not be smoking that you enjoy. It might be having a beer, it might be having a glass of wine or whatever it is. But the idea that these same people who advocate for restrictions on smoking aren't going to do exactly the same when it comes to enjoying a drink, it's absolute nonsense. They're going to come for that as soon as they're done with tobacco.
Yeah, so I was going to say, one of the reasons it's not just non-smokers, it's former smokers, many who switched to vaping. Now, you know, we completely support vaping. We support e-cigarettes, heated tobacco, nicotine pouches, anything that gives consumers a choice. And if there are smokers who want to quit and they need to switch to something that's equally pleasurable, then that's a good way of giving up smoking. But what drives me potty are the number of vapers, many of them ex-smokers, who have simply washed their hands of smoking issues because they say, well, it doesn't affect us anymore. Therefore, we're only interested in vaping issues. And we say to them, well, hang on a sec. Where smoking is banned today, vaping will be banned in the future. In fact, it's already happening because even without any laws, a lot of publicans who have chosen unilaterally to ban smoking outside their pub, they're banning vaping as well because they're saying, well, I can't tell the difference between somebody smoking or vaping. So they're just saying, right, we're going to ban both.
So why can't they see this, though? I mean, it's so obvious. The two are entwined, aren't they?
I was just going to say, obviously, there's a lot of talk about cracking down on flavours when it comes to vapes. It's the exact same thing they did with cigarettes when they took away sort of menthols. It's going to be the exact same playbook in terms of cracking down on vaping as well.
You can see it rolling out. I mean, I take the view, and I've seen it over the years, as someone who grew up in the late 70s and very much becoming aware of smoking. Both my parents were smokers, so smoking featured in my life, and I smoked cigars. But throughout the 80s, you'd go into a newsagent's and you'd see that big selection of cigarettes behind the counter, different packaging, different colours, etc. And now those cigarettes are in plain packaging, behind a shutter. I take the view, in some parts of England, it's easier to score some hash than it is to buy a packet of 20 Rothmans or whatever. It's just utterly bizarre. Why? Let's spend a few moments talking about the anti-smoking lobby, because they're quite, not violent physically, but verbally and politically, they're quite violent, aren't they? What drives them?
Well, a lot of them are ex-smokers, funny enough. I think a lot of them are just incredibly smug. They're very patronising. They're very middle class. And although I'm very middle class, I can see that this is a bit of a class war. And it's an attack on essentially what traditionally has been a working class habit over the last 40, 50 years. Right. Obviously, go back before then, and 80% of men were smoking, 40% of women, so it was more than just a working class thing. But there is an element, I often compare this to Brexit actually, is that just as we were told after Brexit, oh, you must be stupid to vote for Brexit, you didn't know what you were doing. Essentially, the same argument is used about people who smoke. The assumption is, oh, you must be stupid to smoke, or you don't know what you're doing. And I do think there's a lot of snobbery around it. There's a lot of people, middle classes, who have quit smoking, and they now feel they've got to help all other smokers. Like helping a little old lady across the road. She doesn't want to cross the road, but they're determined that they're going to do that. Of course, there are some smokers who want to quit, but there are plenty of schemes already in place to help them. I mean, actually, the government has just announced in its spending review is going to give, I think, £98 million to smoking cessation services. Now, £98 million compared to the debt that this country is in doesn't sound very much. No. But you've got to look after every penny. And to throw another £98 million at smoking cessation services, why do we actually need them? I take the view, frankly, that if you start smoking and you want to give up, you should do it on your own dime, not expecting non-smoking taxpayers to pay for you to do it. And again, I know that some people find it difficult to give up smoking, but millions of people have given up smoking. So it's not one of these things that you're so addicted to, you simply can't do it. What often happens is that you need to have a sufficient excuse. It might be a health scare, or it might be you start having children. And you don't want to smoke around babies and young children. There's lots of reasons why people give up smoking. I don't think it's the taxpayers' duty to pay for people to quit smoking.
It's really interesting what you say. I'd never really considered it as some form of class war. That's interesting. What do you think, Ben?
I think that's spot on. There is a snobbery. It is looked down on by certain peoples, and it's this idea of you're too stupid to know what you're doing is wrong. So we're going to stop you doing it. You don't get a choice in it. We're just going to take it away from you.
And you're absolutely right. Whilst it might not affect someone who doesn't smoke, if you start tolerating this attitude of going after smokers, at some point it'll be, they'll come after you because you like double cream or too many chocolate eclairs or whatever. So I think that's pretty sad. Let's also talk about how smokers are sometimes portrayed in the media, because I found this quite fascinating. Up until about Die Hard and Bruce Willis, all right, very cool. There's a man who takes on the baddies and he's got a cigarette on the go. That was in the 80s. Now, you only ever see a baddie smoking on TV, someone in a soap opera who's going to do something bad, they're a smoker, the baddie in a film, they've got a cigarette on the go. I'm not imagining this, am I? It's almost like that. It's like smoking, bad person, bad character. That's how elements of the media portray smokers.
Yes, I think that's true. But despite that, the anti-smoking lobby still wants to stop people smoking in movies and on television. It doesn't really make a great deal of sense. Of course, our argument is that, look, you've got to give the right artistic license. The reality at the moment is that I don't think you'll see anybody smoking before the watershed at 9 o'clock. But after that, it's part of characterisation. Now, you're right. I think a lot of the characterisation is used to show the baddies who are smoking. You only have to watch the gold that's on at the moment. Now, of course, that goes back to the 80s. when a lot more people smoked, including goodies as well as baddies. But it's interesting that in the gold, it seems to be all the baddies, all the thugs and criminals who are puffing away like mad.
Go on.
And you can also add in, you now get they call them trigger warnings.
Yes.
If you're watching sort of something on one of the streaming services, for example, I was watching a Star Wars movie the other night, and it had a tobacco depictions warning before it started. It's just nuts.
It is nuts. I remember a story from several years ago now. The comedian Mel Smith. I don't know how old you are, Ben. You might not remember Mel Smith. You'll remember Mel Smith.
I do.
Alas Smith and Jones, and he was playing Churchill in the stage play.
Yep.
And I think I've got this right. They wouldn't allow him to light up the cigar.
It was at the Edinburgh Festival.
That was it.
Yeah, and he in protest, he stuck his head out of a window with a big cigar, playing the part of Churchill, and he hated that.
It's just why do these people go so far down the line in actually saying, well, you know what, Winston Churchill might have been a cigar smoker, but you can't portray him in the way that he was by smoking a cigar. Those who are anti-smoking, why do they think they can get away with this?
Well, the problem is that they're always looking for the next logical step.
Yeah.
I remember back in 1998, 1999, they were simply calling for more smoke-free areas in pubs and restaurants. There was no question of banning smoking in the workplace. And then, of course, they got their ban in 2007, which we might come on to shortly. And so, of course, they had to look for something else. Now, the next thing they looked for was, of course, the display ban, banning the sight of tobacco in shops. Now, I'm a lifelong non-smoker. Apart from the odd cigarette or the odd cigar, I'm not a smoker. But I grew up in the 60s, 70s and 80s, and seeing cigarettes behind a counter never encouraged me to smoke. And there were millions of people just like me, because for the last 50 years, smoking rates have been in decline. So clearly there are millions of people out there who haven't been encouraged by this. Of course, the next thing they want to do is put the health warning on the individual stick. The idea is that, it does suggest actually a lot of these health warnings haven't been very successful. We said this about when they introduced these graphic warnings on cigarette packs. We said these are not going to work. That very quickly that's going to become like wallpaper. Smokers are not going to notice it, and that's exactly what happened, which is why they had to bring in plain packaging. So they're always looking for the next logical step, but partly because it keeps them in business. The anti-smoking lobby,
there's money in it.
There's huge money in it these days, and that's why they're so desperate, for example, to get the government to introduce a tobacco levy, which they want anything between 150 million or 300 million pounds from the tobacco companies, which will end up being used to essentially pay for even more anti-smoking campaigns, which of course is more jobs for them. It's a racket.
Just going back to the display stuff, I've always found it remarkably insulting that people think that I might see some brightly coloured packaging and all of a sudden going to go, I must buy some, I'm not of sound mind, I can't make my own decisions, therefore I like that particular colour of red, so therefore I'm going to start smoking. They are treating us like kids.
Absolutely, and it's incredibly inconvenient when you're buying them. For one thing, the amount of times, or the amount of time it takes the cashier to find what you have actually asked for, and then you get the wrong one, and then it goes back, and that's even before you get anywhere near the counterfeiting.
And it's reduced choice as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the variety has declined, but the black market is booming for tobacco now, and it's as a direct consequence of the tighter regulation on its sale.
Let's talk about 2007, because I thought that was just, I still think it's outrageous that we had this bit of legislation that meant, all of a sudden you couldn't smoke in a pub or a restaurant or whatever. I went to an event on the last day of freedom, if you like, called the Last Indoor Cigar Party at the Hotel de Vin in Brighton, which was, I think I'm still recovering, because basically it was 5 courses and a cigar between each course. And at the end, it was tremendous, but it was a pretty foggy evening in more ways than one. Why did that happen, do you think, in 2007? That massive bit of legislation that has seriously curtailed people's freedoms and rights?
I think it was pure politics, because up until 2005, there'd been a huge debate, and actually we felt we were doing okay in that debate. And if you remember, in the 2005 general election, Labour manifesto said that they wanted to exempt pubs that didn't serve food from the ban.
Yeah.
So we felt even that was going too far, because our view was that private businesses, whether they were pubs, restaurants, cafes, or even any other sort of private office, it was up to them whether or not they introduced a smoking ban. And of course, by 2005, a lot of offices had banned smoking.
Yeah.
We weren't living in the 60s or 70s where, famously, Fleet Street offices, for example, were reported to be a fug of smoke.
Yeah.
People weren't living like that anymore. But what happened was Labour won the 2005 general election. John Reid then was replaced as Health Secretary by Patricia Hewitt. And she set her sights, basically egged on by the likes of Ash, who were actually on Smoking and Health, who were very much of calling the tune and pulling the strings. They were determined to settle for nothing less than a comprehensive ban. Now, I have to say, we weren't helped by some people in the pub industry. Because, for example, Wetherspoons, Tim Martin, he got behind the smoking ban. Originally, about 2 years before the smoking ban came in, Wetherspoons unilaterally banned smoking in about 40 of their, I think, 400 pubs they had in those days. And it wasn't a success. Within a year, he had to reverse that smoking ban. But he continued to support a smoking ban, basically because he was happy to have a level playing field.
Yeah.
And of course, we had the disgraceful situation where the pub industry basically got behind it because they did not want an exemption for private members' clubs. Now, that would have been working men's clubs plus your Pall Mall type club. Yeah. And certainly, the Conservatives were trying to support an exemption for private members' clubs. The pub industry said, no, we cannot have exemptions. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that they were worried that they were going to lose a lot of business to working men's clubs if working men's clubs were allowed to have smoking, and they weren't. So there were a lot of factors involved.
As someone who, I describe myself as a free market disciple, I've never understood why we didn't go down the route of let's say you've got a high street, a very small high street, you have one pub that's a smoking pub, one pub that's not a smoking pub, and you let people decide, and actually I think both would remain and thrive, wouldn't they?
Well, Tony Blair's original idea was to let individual councils, individual local authorities decide what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
But it was pointed out that you could have a ludicrous situation in London, for example, where a road where on one side the pub was in Lambeth, on the other side it was in Wandsworth. Yeah. Wandsworth, being a Conservative council, probably would not have banned smoking, but Lambeth would have. And, of course, the pubs on the Lambeth side of the road said this is going to be disastrous for us. But again, coming back to this class warfare thing, the pubs that suffered most from the smoking ban were not your nice middle-class gastro pub with a nice big beer garden. Yeah. They were the inner-city urban pubs that had no outdoor space. Yeah. And they're the ones who, by and large, went out of business. I mean, in the 2 years immediately after the ban, about 2,000 pubs closed down. Yeah. Between the 10 years after the smoking ban, I think something like 10,000 pubs out of 60,000 closed down. Now, it wasn't just to do with the smoking ban. There were other factors involved, but the smoking ban clearly had a huge impact. Yeah. And a lot of people, a lot of smokers, particularly elderly smokers, just stopped going to the pub. Yeah. And now, of course, we're told that loneliness is almost as bad for your health as smoking.
Exactly that. So Ben, what are your fears going forward about where we find ourselves and our rights and freedoms being limited or restricted or removed?
I think they will largely follow the anti-smoking playbook. We already see it with things like the soft drinks levy, going after the sugar in products. We will start seeing more health warnings. We will see taxes on different products. And they will keep ramping it up and essentially trying to make these things unaffordable and unappealing. And it's this dreadful sort of Puritan spirit that's somehow still going, and this desire to just take away choice from people. So, I think next we'll see a greater focus on alcohol alongside cracking down more on vaping, and then it will be onto salt and meat and sugar.
Simon, what are you working on currently at the moment?
Well, at the moment, we're doing our best to fight the tobacco and vapes bill, which is currently going through Parliament. Now, of course, this started under Rishi Sunak. He came out with this wonderful idea to ban the sale of tobacco to all future generations of adults. Now, Labour, not surprisingly, took that up. And at the moment, the bill, is still progressing quite slowly, I have to say. But if the bill is passed, it's due to come into force, at least the generational ban is due to come into force in 2007. And what's going to happen is that they will raise the age of sale by 1 year every year until, in theory, no adult of any age will be able to legally buy tobacco. Now, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, treating people like children, this is a classic example. Because you're saying to somebody who's 18, when they are legally an adult, and at that age, they've been allowed to legally have sex from 16. At 17, they can drive a car, they can join the army. At 18, they can legally purchase alcohol, they can possess a credit card, and of course, they can vote. Which, of course, the most ironic thing here is that the same politicians who are calling to raise the age of sale of tobacco want to reduce the age at which you can vote to 16. So a child at 16 can vote for the government or the party that they want to vote for, but increasingly you won't be able to choose to buy tobacco. And we're going to have this ludicrous situation within 10, 15 years where a 30-year-old will be allowed to buy tobacco, but somebody who may be only 2 or 3 days younger will be prohibited. So what we're getting is creeping prohibition. But the long term is very clear, because even as this tobacco and vapes bill goes through Parliament, there's been an amendment tabled by Lord Bethell, Conservative peer, who the amendment says all tobacco products should be prohibited by 2040.
Right.
Now, prohibition, that's the aim, and we all know what happens with prohibition. You drive a product underground, the criminal gangs take over. We've seen it in Australia, where there's been a huge crackdown, not just on tobacco, but on vapes. And we're seeing vape shops being fire-bombed, because you basically get rival criminal gangs attacking one another. That will eventually happen with tobacco and vapes. If we go the same way with vapes, I agree with Ben, it's going to happen. But, I mean, just going back to this business of treating people like children, one last story from when I was growing up in Scotland. I remember when I was a teenager in Scotland, pubs used to have frosted glass. The idea was that they didn't want minors, children, seeing in and seeing people drinking and enjoying themselves. You weren't even allowed to take your drink outside the pub, again, in case children saw you. Now, of course, over the last 40, 50 years, that's all become more liberalised, if you like. But I think there's a danger we're going to go back to that type of society where we're trying to protect children by denying them the sight of something. And obviously that's the idea behind the ban in France. From July the 1st in France, they're going to ban smoking in parks and on beaches. And they're saying it's not for health reasons, because we know that if you're in the open air, you're not a threat to anybody else's health. But we don't want to see children seeing an adult smoke. And I think, again, it wouldn't surprise me at all, going back to Ben's point about alcohol, the same thing will happen 20, 30, 40 years' time. There'll be an attack on alcohol, particularly as the number of people who drink alcohol comes down. At the moment, they don't dare do it because the majority of people drink alcohol. But we already know younger people drink less alcohol, partly because of the price, but for other reasons as well. And if we get to a situation 20, 30 years' time when a minority of the population drink alcohol, that's when they'll really go for them.
And I suppose we have to consider the tax implications as well, because, you've got duty on booze, you have obviously duty on tobacco as well. If we're not allowed to smoke anymore, or future generations are not able to do that, and whichever government's in power then follows with the idea of, well, let's start cracking down on booze as well, they're going to have to find clever ways of making up the loss to the Treasury.
Absolutely. So tobacco duties raise around £9 billion a year. The sort of more recent estimate for the sort of costs to the health service of smoking puts the figure at about £3 billion a year. So we regularly hear this argument, that smokers are a huge drain on finances and all the rest of it. Actually, they pay for themselves more than twice over. So if you just set that aside for a moment, if we found ourselves in a situation with zero coming in from tobacco duties, we actually did some research here at the TPA, I think at the beginning of last year. You would need to increase the basic and higher rates of income tax by a penny, as well as cutting the personal allowance. So it's not the case that banning tobacco is somehow cost-free to everyone. It's quite the opposite. We'll all have to pay. Non-smokers will have to start paying more in order to fill that hole.
Simon, a final word from you. People listening to this podcast feeling maybe now galvanised. What can they do? How can they join the fight? What should they do?
Well, they can sign up to our website for a start. Now, that might seem a small thing, but we need numbers, because it's very easy to dismiss the smokers' lobby and say, oh, it's only a small group of ultra-libertarians. That's not the case at all. I don't consider myself to be a particularly hard, not libertarian by any means. And we're just ordinary people who say, look, how far do you want the government to intrude in your life? Now, I accept that a lot of people watching this don't smoke, maybe have no interest in smoking. But as we said at the very beginning, you've got to take an interest in this, because if you don't take an interest in the issue of tobacco, which I consider to be almost like the canary in the coal mine, once they come for smokers and they think it works, they'll come for you after that.
Simon, it's been great having you in. Thank you for joining us. Ben, thank you as well.
Thank you.
This is A Nation of Taxpayers, the podcast on the Taxpayers Alliance. If you'd like to email us regarding anything that you've heard or suggest a future guest, we have an email address, which is podcast@taxpayersalliance.com. You can find this particular podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube, and you can help us out by following and liking us and help us spread the word. Until next time, thank you for listening.